Hey everybody, welcome back to Mac and Mike. Today we're going to have a discussion, at least start out discussing the secession movement within Canada and other things about Canada. So take it away, Matt.
Mike, we had a big snowstorm here, so I changed my background to be this beautiful palm tree and ocean lapping up on the beach, which is where I'd rather be today than a dozen inches of snow outside my house. But yeah, I think the Canada story is one that is being underreported and underrepresented. We talk about Greenland because, what's going on with Greenland and the need to, Trump says he needs it because he wants to put the Golden Dome to protect America, actually all of North America. And Greenland is ideally placed to be the early warning system for, intercontinental ballistic missiles. But so there's been a lot of, and of course there was the Davos thing recently, and the president spoke there, and he spoke very pointedly about America's need to have access to Greenland. So Greenland and Ukraine and to some lesser extent other stories about Donald Trump and our NATO and other things have been dominating the headlines. But the interesting story that I think is being underreported and underrepresented is what's going on in Canada right now. If you watch the Davos stuff, you saw that Prime Minister Mark Carney spoke very pointedly about and to Donald Trump about this renegotiation of the North American, the new trade deal that they signed 6 years ago with Donald Trump and the USMCA. And for whatever reason, it had a renegotiation period after 6 years. So that 6 years is now up, and they're now going into a renegotiation phase. And Donald Trump has asked for some more concessions from Canada. Well, what Canada did in response to what Donald Trump asked was Prime Minister Carney, just before the Davos get-together of all the NATO, all the World Economic Forum countries, including the NATO countries, he made a trip to China to try to create a new Chinese-Canada trade agreement, which is kind of like, literally sticking his finger in Donald Trump's eye. Now, when I say that, I'm sure that's the way Donald Trump takes it, because, of course, Donald Trump thinks China is our geopolitical enemy. And by the way, when Carney was running for prime minister, he said that the biggest geopolitical threat to Canada was the nation of China. So it's interesting that he chose that. But they are the second largest trade partner for China, but they have 80% of the oil and gas resources in the country of Canada within the confines of the province of Alberta. Now, the thing about Alberta is that it has no access to get rid of or to trade that oil and gas except south. They have pipelines to the United States. They are working on a pipeline to get to the Pacific coast through Vancouver, which will give them an outlet, and if they get that done, and I guess it's pretty soon, it will be completed, a port on the Pacific Ocean for the oil and gas from Alberta would clearly give China easy access to that valuable resource. And of course, what we did in Venezuela, and that's the other story that's been dominating the headlines, right? What we did in Venezuela, deny the Chinese the Venezuelan oil. So wouldn't it be a real kick in the pants to have our neighbor, Canada, replace the Venezuelan oil that they lost with Canadian oil? So it's Alberta has to go through a process of getting the issue on the ballot, seceding from Canada. They needed, I think, 178,000 signatures, and the first day they got more than 190,000 signatures, so it will be on the ballot. That doesn't mean that it'll actually be voted in, but it'll certainly be on the next ballot that they have. And, Mike, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. You know that. You know me. But, in my own way, I'm thinking to myself, America, the U.S., has a checkered history. The nation of Panama wouldn't exist if the United States didn't foment a insurrection there and create the nation of Panama and then recognize it so that we could build the Panama Canal. There's been other incursions in other places. And of course, not only did we do Venezuela recently, but there's talk of Cuba as well. So wouldn't it be interesting if we found out the CIA was seeding people in Alberta for the secessionist movement? I'm not saying they are. I'm just saying that it sounds mysteriously and suspiciously like something that we'd be capable of doing. And I'm not sure how I feel about that. Again, that's just a supposition on my part. I have no basis, no knowledge base to say that's actually going on. But we've got some really interesting things going on in Canada. For example, we had the fires in Canada, the fires, a lot of homes that you want to build, you need loans. lumber. Well, 90% of the lumber resources in Canada are exported to the United States of America. So where they, and I believe if Prime Minister Carney has not already, he means to stop all exports to the United States until this new version of the USMCA has been negotiated and signed. So that puts us in a world of hurt because the western provinces of Canada all do almost exclusively all of their trade with the United States. You don't need a ship to transport it. You don't need an airplane to transport it. Whatever resource you're talking about can come across land either by rail or by vehicle, by truck, and come to the United States, where, oh, by the way, if we lose the electricity generated by Canada. Mike, do you know what the cheapest form of electricity is? Hydroelectric, absolutely correct. That was an easy one. Guess who produces the most hydroelectric electricity in the world?
Suppose you're going to say
Canada does. And you know what they do with that very, very cheap and inexpensive electricity? Vast majority of that cheap electricity goes into creating aluminum, which is one of the largest exports Canada exports, along with uranium, along with steel. But aluminum is a desperately needed commodity in the United States. Do you know my truck, my Ford pickup truck? The body of my truck is made out of aluminum. If we don't get aluminum from Canada, Ford can't make any pickup trucks anymore. Or they'll have to make it out of some other material. We won't be able to make any more F-35s. Do you know how many orders we have for F-35s for aircraft for our friends and neighbors throughout the world? I think, was it Poland or Finland just ordered like 35 or some big number, maybe it was 50, of our F-35 aircraft. Incredible, because NATO has to step up their spending percent of GDP for defense. That's another thing that Trump did. So I feel like I'm talking too much, Mike, but, all these things are going on in Canada, the renegotiation of the USMCA, the possible secession of, and by the way, if they become an independent nation, it's a matter of time before they apply to become the 51st state of the United States. They're inexorably connected to the United States in so many different ways. All of their oil comes south through pipelines to the United States. We have the refineries that are necessary to refine that heavy, dirty crude that they get out of the sands in Canada. So that economic connection is so strong that I don't know how it can possibly be broken. But at the same time, the Prime Minister of Canada is saying, hey, look, Mr. President, if you want to play hardball, we can play hardball too. We will stop all exports from Canada into the United States until this is done. So it seems like a mess, Mike. What can you make of all that?
Well, on your last about becoming a state, I have to look into it, but I don't think they would want to, mainly because I did little research and their oil reserves are such that they could be like Saudi Arabia or Kuwait in the sense that, and remember, let me step back. Their first problem is they send so much money to the Canadian government and they don't receive it back. And
True.
This happens a lot in America. When I was in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, they were the #1 revenue source for North Carolina for tourism. Yet the state would not send enough money back to do beach reclamation and other things that they needed to keep the tourists coming in. And so this is the same problem up in Canada. They're sending more money to the government than they're getting back in services. If they just had their population and just did business with the United States, they'd be more wealthy than the United States because then they would have to remit taxes to our wasteful government. They could afford a private doctor for every 100 citizens, They would have no healthcare issues like Canada does or like the United States. I think people would be flocking there. They'd probably have to build a wall, make sure people didn't come in, try and take advantage of their system.
Well, there's a lot of advantages to being a citizen in the United States as well, Mike.
Well, there's more disadvantages when you can be the wealthiest country in the world per capita. So, I would never join the United States. That's kind of like wasteful. But the problem has been going on for a long time. Even Quebec wanted to secede from Canada at one point because of their French language issues and cultural issues. It's kind of going back and forth. We'll have to see where it goes. It's interesting. Now, the video you sent me earlier today was artificial intelligence and was from a group that only has like 8 videos up there, and they all hate Trump, Trump, Trump. But, they take a kernel of truth and then amplify it, kind of like Trump does. he takes a kernel of truth and amplifies it. So, it's really what's happening. I started to do my own artificial intelligence videos, the shorts I sent you.
I saw that. That was
I posted one to Facebook, and one of my friends said, "Whoa, Mike's doing AI now. We don't know what to trust anymore." And
yeah, I saw that. You be laying face down in your own blood and urine.
yeah, life is about decisions. Make the wrong ones, and you'll wind up face down in the pool of your own blood and urine. That's in relation to the protesters.
Did you do that through Grok?
I did one through Grok and one through Gemini. They both have it. Other people are using from ChatGPT. Look at that. But these only come with the paid version. They don't really do anything with the free versions. So I pay for Gemini and Grok now. So I'd have to probably give up Gemini if I want to move over to ChatGPT. Money is your limit. So anyway, I don't know what to make of Canada. I know people from Canada. They used to come down to the Outer Banks, North Carolina all the time. It's funny. I lived there year round. So in November, I'd be down there, and there'd be all these people on the beach, and I'd start talking to them. And the water temperature was like 58 degrees, and the air temperature was like 70. And I'd say, "What? How can you guys get in the water?" I said, "Oh, this is like summertime for us down here, don't you know?"
Yeah.
I said, "Holy crap, they're hardy people."
Yeah.
Yeah.
For the most part, the Canadians I've known are good people. I don't know why their government in Ottawa is so liberal and so, so. I don't know the right answer. If you remember Trudeau, when the truckers were protesting the high price of fuel, among other things, the government literally just erased them. It took froze their bank accounts, shut off their credit cards, took away their insurance for their vehicle, canceled their license for their vehicle. They didn't like what they were doing, and they came down on them like a ton of bricks. And literally, people couldn't, if they didn't have cash with them, they couldn't get something to eat. Couldn't fill up the gas tank to drive home.
Oh, yeah. Canada is very much like China. It doesn't surprise me that they want to get in bed with them. There's very little difference. You could say, okay, there's some kind of democracy in Canada, or what do they call it when you have a prime minister? Or what is that type of government called? I forget.
Parliamentary?
Parliamentary. It's parliament. But really, the type of government we have, we're protected by free speech in our Constitution. They don't have that kind of thing with it, just like Great Britain doesn't have. And Great Britain has become very authoritarian. They're actually fining people, throwing people in jail for saying something the government or somebody doesn't like on social media.
Yeah.
And, it really boils down, I think, to authoritarianism, which is what people accuse Trump of. There's always tension. So anyway, I don't know what else to say about the subject. You have anything more to say about it?
Well, I would say this, Mike. In many ways, I think Donald Trump is an authoritarian. And I do think that he is using power of the presidency that is not power that the founders necessarily wanted the president to have. Treaties, for example, exclusively were the purview of the Senate. Part of the answer to what Trump wants to do in Greenland was a mutual defense treaty that was signed in 1951 that gave us access to several military bases, many of which were mothballed and haven't been used in a number of years. But Trump is getting access to those bases based on the 1951 treaty. And if I understand it correctly, I've not seen the official documents, but supposedly with these military bases will transfer sovereign authority over the geographic areas where these military bases are. The issue of Greenland is a complex one. I think that Canada is certainly a complex one, but I think we will negotiate that. I think the best interest of both nations lie in a agreement with USMCA. We need their uranium. We don't have any other source for uranium, thanks to Hillary Clinton and the State Department approving uranium 1 to Russia. We need their steel because we don't make enough steel to meet our needs. We need their hydroelectric power, which the Midwest, if we don't have that electricity, could possibly face rolling blackouts or brownouts. We need their aluminum to continue manufacturing. So there's so many things, and they need us because they need our consumer marketplace. As I said, 90% of the lumber harvested in Canada is exported to the United States. It makes sense. It doesn't sound like exporting lumber by ship or aircraft is an economical way to sell lumber. It's a lot less expensive to put on a truck or on a rail car and ship it to the United States. But Greenland is a beast all its own, and I'm not real sure how that's going to turn out. Trump is dead insistent on the Golden Dome, which is the America's version of the Iron Dome that Israel uses to protect itself against rockets. How do you feel about the Golden Dome, Mike? Do you think it's necessary? Do you think it should be a goal of the United States?
Yeah, I thought a lot about that actually. People are saying it's like Reagan's Star Wars. Is it really possible? And the other thing is with the massive increase in drones, will it really, matter in the long run, or is warfare changing to the point where the Golden Dome will be obsolete by the time it's built? The Golden Dome wouldn't be able to stop what they call the rods of God being dropped directly, kinetically. There's kinetic weapons and there's ones that can be dropped as nuclear. And all you need is an electromagnetic pulse. You don't need to destroy this infrastructure, you just explode it in the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And out go the lights. Now, that's where we're working on getting, these small nuclear reactors to run safely, so you can't wipe out all of the electricity if every town has its own nuclear generator. You could damage still a lot of it, but you couldn't take it all out. So I don't know. I don't know if it's pie in the sky, Mac. We won't be around to see the completion of the construction, I don't think. But we'll start on it, I guess, at some point.
No, but I think you have to look at Donald Trump with a mixture of positive and negative and almost it doesn't matter kind of feelings. Some of the things Donald Trump says and does antagonize me. I understand why the Prime Minister of Canada might be antagonized when Donald Trump says, Mark, meaning Prime Minister of Canada, Carney, he says, Mark, Canada wouldn't exist without the United States. They wouldn't eat without the United States. And, I think there's even a grain of truth in it, like you said, but Trump is the master of hyperbole, right? He takes that grain of truth and he amplifies it into something that really isn't quite accurate. And I understand, and he does that because he's trying to, as it says in The Art of the Deal, he's trying to put them off of their mark a little bit, off of their calm demeanor, so he can take advantage of them in the deal making. And I mean, but I do think that when it comes to statecraft, that there is a level of decorum that probably needs to be maintained regardless. And that's not something that Donald Trump is good at. I don't think he tries.
No, I agree.
But getting done what he gets done, I think he's going to end the Russia-Ukraine war. But I think it's going to stop the mounting death toll. Literally millions of people. What did he say the other day in Davos? 25 to 30,000 soldiers are dying every month. I don't know how you can keep killing that many people without eventually running out of people to kill, Mike.
Yeah, that's the thing. But I agree with you, too. I love Trump's policies overall, but if you had to deal with a guy like him, it would probably get very tiresome. And I think that's one of the things. He wears out his opponents. You get tired of fighting with your neighbor, and sooner or later, it comes to the point where you just stop talking to each other, and maybe at some point it gets violent. And those are the types of risks. I think when we listen to people who are, we call them Trump derangement syndrome, they're manifesting and multiplying the potential outcomes of this type of behavior in their own minds. Where if it would go on longer than the term of a presidency, say there could be a, quote, king or a guy like Trump in charge, like Putin in Russia for years and years, man, that could really get tiresome. And the poor countries that have to deal with this.
Yeah, it's one thing when you're dealing with the Biden administration and then dealing with the Trump administration, two opposite ends of the spectrum approaches to government and to deal making. So I understand how people get a little bit frustrated by different administrations, but to have that kind of bipolar attitude in the same, from the same guy in the same administration, it's got to be tiring. And, Mike, Carney, for what he said at Davos, was mostly accurate. The United States is trying to take advantage of our relationship with Canada, and it's Trump's position that they've been taking advantage of us for so long that it's time to get even, and he's more concerned about our economy than he is with theirs. I want my president to be more concerned about my economy than that of another country. But I do think that Canada has a, rather unique connection to America. We're both descendants of the same European peoples. We have the same kind of Judeo-Christian value system that our government is based on, even though it's a different form of government. And we are inexorably connected through so many different kinds of trade, back and forth. One of the biggest importers of our spirits and our wine and spirits has been Canada. The USMCA, the tariffs on wine and spirits were changed, and so Canadians started drinking Canadian wine and spirits. So Kentucky bourbon is almost impossible to buy in Canada today. Kentucky bourbons are arguably among the finest bourbons in the world, but the people of Canada can't drink it. It's because of the arbitrary way in which we established the original USMCA. I think the people in Canada would like to drink Kentucky bourbon. I think the distillers who make Kentucky bourbon would very much like to export to Canada. And you would think we ought to be able to find a way to do that. I understand it's not aluminum, it's not electricity, it's not oil, but it's still a commodity that, is important to some people. But getting back to Greenland, Mike, there are so many issues with Greenland, and I wish I saw the entire deal that the Greenland supposedly the future deal is supposed to be based on. My understanding is, as I said, it's going to take parts of the 1951 Mutual Defense Pact agreement that we have. It's also going to take military bases that we have not used in a long time and reactivate them, and then we will have sovereignty over some amount of ground that currently belongs to Greenland, but we won't take over the entire nation. We'll also have access to certain minerals and maybe restrict access to those minerals to other nations like China. Have you ever seen China rare earth mine, Mike? Pictures of it?
I never personally saw one, no.
You've seen pictures of them?
No, never even looked them up.
Okay. Do you know how the United States used to do strip mining? We would literally go in and strip all the earth off the ground. We would take out the coal, and then we'd leave this big scar on the earth with nothing but this crap left over from the mines. And they put certain laws into place so that if somebody goes in and does strip mining, they have to reclaim the land by putting earth and dirt and trees and all that kind of stuff back on it. Well, what the Chinese do with their mines is they go in and they do this. They leave it in the way we used to leave a strip mine. It's just this big gash in the earth where it exposes people to all kinds of things that are not healthy for them. And that's what they're doing in Africa now, because they're doing a whole lot of mining in Africa, the Chinese do. And I believe that's what they do in Greenland too, if they had the chance to do so. Or in China. One of the things I heard in doing my research was that the Chinese, obviously, that every industry in China is run by the Chinese military. I don't care what it is, whether it's manufacturing vehicles or doing oil or mining or whatever it is a company that. So the government of China is a minor investor in several oil and gas projects in Canada. But part of this new deal that they're talking about with China would allow China to have majority interest in these oil and gas drilling, mining. And I think it'd be a horrible thing for Canada as well. China, again, going back to Carney running for office as prime minister, they asked him who the biggest geopolitical threat to Canada was, and he said China. And yet on his way over to Davos, he stops in China with a trade delegation trying to establish a new trade agreement with China. Close relations between China and Canada, it doesn't matter what it is, it's bad for the United States.
Well, they're going to start letting Chinese electric vehicles into their country and other vehicles. And that's the thing Trump was most concerned about, that things that we don't allow into the United States could start coming into our country through Canada. And, so that's one of the things he vocalized. Now, if you've never seen a Chinese-made electric vehicle, you're in for a shock. We're talking the most advanced electric vehicles in the world that are so plush and elegant, and what would cost $250,000 in the United States, you can buy for $50,000. Nope, we're not talking about Yugos, buddy. That's funny because my buddy Stan was from Yugoslavia, and home of the Yugo. That's where that car came from. And if you're not old enough to remember that piece of junk, go look it up on Wikipedia. It was a half a joke. But I'll get back to something real quick. As we talk, the audience can see you, but not me. Just a reminder of that. So I squared my screen off here. And you and I both being Christians, that's one of the first things that comes to my mind. I recalled, so I looked it up. Christianity in Canada is almost non-existent anymore. 14% attend church. In the United States, it's more than double that. People that identify...
Say that like that's a great accomplishment.
Yeah.
Double 14%, 30% of the United States.
Yeah. I mean, it's been dwindling in the United States, which we've discussed before. It's down quite a bit. But, okay, we talk about identification, and we can make a joke about how you sexually identify. But, so overall Christian identification is less than 42% in Canada and around 62% in the United States. And I do draw a correlation, they say correlation is not causation, to the decline of the country and its overall lack of religious faith, and especially Christianity here in the West, because that's what drove, the sense of obedience to the law and not ruling over your people tyrannically, which is what we see happening in Canada. And why do you think China gets away with it? They don't have any, the communists want to put down all religious faith. Doesn't matter even if it's peaceful Buddhists. But Christianity, boy, they really have heartburn with that. That's because it speaks against tyranny. Our faith speaks against, and this country and its constitution was founded on Christian principles. You don't invade somebody else's privacy. You give them freedom of speech, but that speech ends at the tip of your nose, right? Swing your arms as much as you want, as long as you don't touch me, it's okay. So those values bleeds its way into negotiations, and it causes all kinds of problems when you don't have a similar frame of moral reference. I'm done with my rant, I suppose, on my view.
I just want to point out that my reference to Judeo-Christian values were based on when I said we have a similar kind of heritage. I was really referring to our initial governments were based on those, John Locke and the Magna Carta and all those things that were based on Judeo-Christian values from the times of Christ. Not that necessarily the people were Christian, although you've clearly given us that information. What I was really referring to is that our approach to government and to society are based on those traditional Judeo-Christian values. That's what I was referring to. And that kind of makes us more compatible, if you will. I mean, when you were in North Carolina interacting with all those Canadians, did you ever have any troubles with them? I mean, they were just regular folks, right?
Yeah, right. Well, it's kind of like what's going on in Minnesota. I got friends from not Minnesota, but Wisconsin, and you met Woody down in the Outer Banks. And of course, their big rivalry in football is, the Minnesota Vikings versus the Green Bay Packers. But, it's a similar culture between Wisconsin. And by and large, the people are all shucks, they're really nice folks and stuff, They like their cheese and get along, but their culture's being overturned. Sad. There's a professor, Gad Sad, wrote the book Suicidal Empathy recently.
Yeah.
And he talks about, nice people that have good intentions are enablers of things that end up detrimental. And I see that happening all across our country. The vital empathy thing.
I agree with you. The Somalis come into Minneapolis, St. Paul, and they don't want to be Americans. They want to be Somali. They have the call to prayer 5 times a day. I know you heard the prayer call to prayer 5 times a day. And I remember when Obama said the call to prayer was one of the most beautiful things he ever heard. Well, let me tell you something, Mike. I don't want to offend any Muslims. And if they want to do the call to prayer, that's fine. We have religious freedom here. But it's not a beautiful sound to me. I've listened to it for a year of my life, and it's not a beautiful sound to me. Maybe it's because I don't understand it. I get it. I'm Christian and not Muslim. But, that cackling, hee-hawing, seesawing song that they do is just, it grates on my nerves in ways that I can't adequately describe. It's almost like, that screeching on the chalkboard that people say is so annoying. It gets me in places I can't explain.
Yeah, it didn't bother me that much. If it happened here in America, it would be one thing. But in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, okay, that's their culture, when in Rome. Right. They got what they put up with.
Yep. They not only accept it, but they embrace it, and it's important to them, and I get it. What I don't, one of the old English bases of law is you have an absolute right to swing your fist up until the point it hits me in the nose, and then it's a problem. And that's the thing with the call to prayer. I don't mind if people do call to prayer, but when they do it in a way that interferes with the day of non-believers in a way that is objectionable to those non-believers, how do we manage that so that no one is disadvantaged or nobody is, I don't mean physically abused, but, how do we meet the needs of the Muslim community that wants the call to prayer and yet not tread on the right to silence, if you will, or right to privacy of the non-believers? So that's a problem. By the way, I mentioned Obama and what he had to say. I came across a thing that, who President Obama's head of ICE was in 2002?
Yeah, it was the same guy as today. What's his name?
Tom Holman.
Yeah.
Tom Homan and the ICE under Obama relocated over 900,000 illegal immigrants. Tom Homan got an award from President Obama for that. So why is it that all of a sudden Tom Homan has gone from being a award-winning cabinet level officer of the Obama administration to somebody they're calling a Nazi now? The only thing that changed is the president. And see, that's the problem. Our media dislikes this president so much. And I understand it. I understand the way he talks about himself in third person and the way he says things with that grain of truth and the hyperbole behind it. And, the negotiations that he's doing all the time. There are people who don't like that, but they ought to be able to report facts and truth. And not change the narrative simply because it works for them in being able to disagree with or abuse this presidential party and this presidential administration. The truth is always the truth, Mike.
Yep, there's no doubt. Well, we beat that up enough?
I guess we did. We have other things to talk about?
Well, yeah, I guess in a way, we could separate this into segments.
Keep your eye on what happens there. I think that's a fascinating story. And do you know that part of the island of Cyprus where the English have their installations are sovereign English territory? I just learned that recently. And I think the solution to Greenland is going to look something like the arrangement the United Kingdom has with the independent government, the independent people of the island of Cyprus. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, well, I know Trump didn't want to sit around and wait for Greenland to authorize certain things, and that was his biggest problem with not having control of Greenland. I think there was an incident in the past where they had to wait for them to vote on something, and it was like, no, we can't do that. So that if we have sovereign control over particular areas where we might want to do mining or something. I understand his position. And you saw that the guy in charge of NATO, I forget what his name is, but essentially came over to Trump's side and he's sitting there talking to everybody and saying, hey, look, the guy's not wrong about this stuff. He wasn't wrong about getting us to pay more. And, he often praised Trump for that. So it just depends on, which side of the fence you sit politically, I guess, on how you're going to view these things.
You know what, Mike? I'll never know this. You'll never know this. The nation will never know it. The media will never know it. But I believe that the President of the United States, either by him individually himself or through representatives, went to the Secretary General of NATO and told them, look, either I'm going to get what I need in Greenland, or I'm leaving NATO, and that'll leave you guys to defend yourself against the Russians. That you tell the rest of them that's what I'm going to do. Now, I'm not real sure he could do that because treaties have to be negotiated and approved by the Senate. But I would not tell Donald Trump he couldn't do anything because that would only make him do it with greater gusto. What I believe happened behind the scenes, and I believe that's why this Greenland compromise came into being.
Well,
Denmark hasn't approved it yet, just NATO has.
Yeah, I have a different potential view on that. I thought about that too. And I said to somebody, I think it was Joe Episcopo, who I said, when I was in the military and special ops, every month we had a classified briefing, right? You had to leave all your cell phones and pagers or whatever didn't have too many cell phones back then outside, no electronic devices. And you learn things in those briefings that, the rest of America didn't know. And I always found that, sometimes it was boring, just a set of facts. Sometimes it was very interesting to get the perspective of what was really going on in the world based on intelligence reports. Now, you got to figure the President of the United States has privileged information that's way, way above what we were getting in the military, right?
Yeah.
And I think he may have persuaded him with just the facts based on intelligence reports and maybe brought evidence to back up what our intelligence agencies were saying, unlike the weapons of mass destruction. It's possible that he just shared classified information that would change any reasonable person's mind.
I've heard, I don't know if this is true or not, but I've heard that the island nation of Greenland has no, what we would call customs kind of people. They have no, national force that deals with who's coming onto our island and who isn't, and their neighborhoods. But there's a vast part of that island that nobody knows what's going on. Just don't. So I understand why Trump is a little bit concerned about that.
Yeah, well, I don't think there's much more to say about Greenland, but I will bring up just one ironic thing that I saw today.
What's that?
Do you know that in Minneapolis, their protesters are actually putting up barricades? Did you see that? And
no.
Barriers, yeah. They're maybe creating a no-go zone like, what was it, Chaz?
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
Where's that? Seattle or
Seattle.
Portland? But yeah, isn't it funny that the people who want to get rid of our borders are setting up borders? I mean, it's just ironic. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's like, okay, we want to keep certain people out of this area. Huh? Isn't that what we're doing with rounding up illegal aliens?
Yeah.
That's just a side note, you know.
Well, the funniest thing I've seen in a long time was that meme you sent, Latino gentleman who said, I'm just putting this out there to all you short-haired liberal white women. If the government's coming after you, we're not standing in front of ice trucks for you. So I'm just saying you're on your own.
Yeah, I shared
I
that.
appreciate your empathy, but you're on your own if they're coming after you.
Yeah, my background is always leading towards psychology and trying to understand human behavior, which that was the course title when I was in college. And I've said many times since then, I don't think there is any understanding human behavior. Try we may, try we might. We're not going to understand it tonight.
It's funny. My father likes to watch these old westerns from the 70s. And one of the TV shows, the Western TV shows he likes to watch is this TV show called The High Chaparral. And there's this Mexican family and there's an American family. And they have on again, off again, good relations, bad relations. But one of the Mexicans' name is Manolito. And his sister is Victoria. And Victoria walks, he's Manolito says something. Victoria walks up to him, slaps him across the face, and then the closing shot of that particular scene is Manolito standing there and says, "I will never understand the women." That was a line from a TV show in the 1970s, and it's still true today. I don't know what Renee Good thought she was going to accomplish there, but it's clear that she was doing exactly what she wanted to do, and she knew what she was doing. And did it with malice and intent and forethought, And I feel bad that she was shot, and I feel even worse that she's dead. But I think that the people who were responsible for her death, herself, her partner, and the people who trained her how to be an anti-ICE protester. And that's a shame.
Yeah, you kind of broke up there for a second, I guess, signal. But yeah, I keep going back in my head to what Beth used to teach the kids. And it's just to ask the simple question, should I be here? I don't personally like crowds, so you're never going to find me in a protest. I went to the first inauguration. I didn't like that. I got sick as a dog, being around all those people. Sick for weeks when I got back. But the question is, should I be here? And we got those nuts on the right that are conspiracy theorists. Now, I'm sure there were FBI informants that maybe egged people on or whatever, but I always ask the question, if you're that suggestible that you can be egged on by anybody. I'm not influenced easily. And I think that's the problem in Minneapolis or anytime protests get out of. If you're that, it's an emotional response. People are easily influenced. And this points to me, because I was in the psychological operations unit, again, not that I was involved in it, but this is how you influence people to do crazy stuff, to submit to an authority like the United States military. So, yeah, it's a human behavior problem. I think it's getting worse. I think it's because we aren't teaching our children to think critically. We're letting them get away with thinking emotionally, throwing tantrums and things of that nature, and then giving in. We've become a very permissive society. And, remember when you and I were young, you said there were a few people who beat up gays. And we don't do that anymore, and nobody approves of that. But the cops would look the other way even back then. Now it's gone full blown that you can be anything you think you want to be because we became too permissive. We always end up this pendulum swings way too far to one side or the other. And when I was a kid, I didn't like Republicans because I thought they were too stubborn, staunchy, because that can happen too, So balance is the key. But
balance is the key, but also common sense is the key, Mike. We don't have a lot of common sense anymore.
Yeah.
Hey, brother, I think we beat this up almost an hour.
All right.
Let's hit it. Mac and Mike.